Guys, I'm Chris. Thanks for being here. This is a closer glimpse. This is my second channel, and this content, well, it's not necessarily all woodworking. If you got here because you're watching my regular channel video, thank you so much. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll link it down below. This is well, maybe I should do the intro. Should we? Yeah, let's do it. This is a 1995 BMW 728i. This car never made it to the United States. It has a manual transmission, and it has most of the bells and whistles from BMW's mid-90s flagship sedan. In this video, I'm gonna take you on a tour of it and show you why it's hitting all the nostalgic buttons for me. Did y'all recognize that intro? If you did, let me know who it was down below. It's actually much more difficult to introduce a car on camera than I thought. It took me about, I don't know, 15 minutes to just do that one clip. The nostalgic buttons for me. I did. Anyway, let's talk about this car for a second. So growing up, I had, well, my first car, the family car. It was a 1987 325. It was a BMW, and my father used it for years. He got it in 1990, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a second, that story. We never were a BMW family, and quite frankly, we still aren't. But we got this one car when I was about 10 years old. And I'll show you a picture of it here. It was an E30 body style, 1987 325, like I said. And those cars today, well-preserved models, are going for pretty big money. There was an M3 that just sold, I believe, on Cars and Bids for over $100,000. I mean, it was restored. It was back to its original pristine condition, but my goodness, worth almost more than double what it was originally worth back in the day. Anyway, this car here, the reason it's so nostalgic for me, because it has that manual transmission. I grew up driving a stick shift. A lot of people call it millennial or Gen Z anti-theft, right? And so that was just an amazing feat back in the day. Most of my friends didn't have manual transmissions. I did. A few of us did. We all kind of knew each other and kind of hung out in the same groups. Not to hang out with those kids that had the automatics. No good. But anyway, I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about this car and why it's so special to me and why I got it and my mindset now as a 44-year-old guy who has a family hauler and something like this. So I recently installed a massive shade sail in our backyard, really helping us out with our outdoor living space, and I decided to put this one here because I've got this car and I want to try to preserve it as best I can. I don't have a garage for it, although it was kept in a garage in Spain where it was originally kept for 27 years. And it's a really good specimen of a car, no doubt. So I want to try to at least mitigate some of the sun damage and whatnot in the year or two that I'm going to own this. And then in a couple years, I'm going to sell it. At least that's the plan anyway. But before we get on the road, I just want to explain what I'm doing back here with this shade sail, and it really does help mitigate some of the, the heat that happens during the middle of the summer. I can get in this car now. I've noticed about a 10-degree difference with this over it than without, which has been fairly helpful. But let's take it out on the road just for a quick spin. So when I first posted this car, I told everybody it was from Spain, and people were like, hey man, I don't know if you know this, but it's not. It's from Poland. There's a story about this. It's not from Poland, it is from Spain. This is a Polish license plate in the EU. The friend of mine that sold this to me, he owns a dealership here in Jacksonville. And shout out to Mike at United Imports. Actually, I'll link him below if you want to check out his selections. Pretty good. Anyway, the NE doesn't mean much, but the 29, my birthday is on the 29th of June. 41. My father and I both, when we were both 41 years old, took the plunge, left corporate America, and started our own businesses almost to the month of how old we were in the age of 41. And then the H, well, you could say it's a manual transmission, I don't know. Anyway, but those two numbers, I was picking through a bunch of these. That's why I put it on there, and there you go. So here's the story about why this is such a nostalgic car for me. Like I said, when I was 16, 17 years old, started driving, my father gave me the family car. It was a two-door 1987 325. No bells and whistles, had a manual transmission. It was pretty much a base model BMW at the time. I started driving in 1996. And so this car was from 1987. So it was a little old in the tooth, about 9 years old, wasn't too bad, but it already had 187,000 miles on it. My dad got this car because when he started the business at 41 years old, in 1988, it was around 1990, and he needed a new car. But the business was new. There wasn't a whole lot of, he wasn't with corporate America anymore. So he was having a hard time getting a car loan. And like we've all been there in our lives. And I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story because it's pretty cool. And back then we banked with Barnett Bank. And I don't know if you guys know, Barnett Bank was bought by Nations, and then Nations Bank turned into Bank of America as we know it today. So at Barnett, we had a relationship, or he did, with just an old personal banker. Let's call him Bob. And he said, Mike, I know you need a car loan. I might be able to help you. I'm sorry you're struggling getting one, but come by my office on Saturday and let's talk. A banker coming to the office wanting to work on a Saturday. Pretty interesting, right? So my dad shows up, and this is kind of the opportunity that Bob presented. So Bob said, sit down, Mike. You have a story to tell me about what's going on? I want to listen to you. I want to hear it. And so my dad proceeds to tell him the story about how he started a business, and he just wants to, progress this thing and grow it and this, that, and the other. There's a lot to it, but I'll spare you the details. And Bob says, I believe you, and I'm gonna finance you a car, no problem, because I believe in you, Mike. Back when the old personal banker was just all about that. And here's what happened. He said, I'll give you a car, but it has to be from one of the ones that we've impounded. And there was two. There was like a Buick Regal, or whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't really the kind of savvy car that he needed for the business, as my dad was going to be a traveling consultant. And he said, but I do have this BMW. It's 325. It looks pretty cool. That might give you a little bit of an edge. It might be a little more presentable if you're going to a business meeting. And that was kind of it. He said, okay, I've never even thought about a BMW, but why not? It's the better of two options at this bank, at this Barnett Bank impound lot. And so that's how we got it. And over the course of the next 6 or 7 years, he drove it from 40,000 miles up to about 187,000 miles, and then handed it down to me. And then I took it from 187,000 miles to 306,000 miles in 3 years. I drove around 40-something to 50,000 miles a year as a teenager around Jacksonville, Florida. I don't even know how I did it. It's the biggest city in the country in terms of land mass. Biggest in the world, second biggest next to Beijing, little fun fact. But yeah, so that car, I spent a lot of time in that car. First girlfriend, there's no crazy story about the car and the first girlfriend, but a lot of memories were made of that first car. And it just eventually just died. And I gave it to one of my neighbors, and he was supposed to restore it, and eventually just got scrapped. So this car came along, and the fact that it's a manual transmission, and then I probably can't fit into a 325 as easy as I once did, I thought this was going to be a really fun thing to do. So I'm going to get behind the wheel, and I'm going to kind of give you some of my driving experience and tell you about me taking it to the mechanic, and let's just get going. The nostalgic feel of this is absolutely just incredible. I love it. And check out these cup holders I made. This is laser cut wood filled with black resin, or flooded with black resin, and it just sits in there. Works great. All right, let's get this thing on the road, and I'll give you a couple impressions of it. I've had it for about, I don't know, about a month, and I've driven it for about maybe 100 miles or so. And it is just an experience. I mean, again, it's nostalgic for me, but honestly, anyone who wants the thrill of driving a vehicle where you feel like your hands are on the road, you really feel like you've just got immense control of the car. This is kind of where it is. Again, automakers have, it seems like there's some 90s cars that are just absolute crap. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know. The 90s and early 2000s was kind of an interesting, era for cars. And who knows what people are going to say about today's cars. I mean, the tech in cars is so amazing. I actually put some Bluetooth in here, and it works really well considering what it is. And the fact that we didn't have cup holders in this car. I mean, there were some cup holders in here, but they're absolute garbage. It's like you can have ashtrays to smoke all down the road, but nah, you're not going to be drinking anything. That's not the idea. But this car is just absolutely incredible. So if I'm behind a car now, and I want to really get around him. You know, I'm in second, and I almost redlined it up to third. Man, it just feels so good. And what's crazy is that this car feels the way it does, and it's a 7 Series BMW. It's the flagship sedan, but man, it doesn't feel like it by today's standards at all. This car feels like an absolute, I don't know, almost like not a compact car, but the center console is, I can actually put my entire hand over the center console in this car, and that's a small vehicle. So, I mean, look how big cars have gotten. But the driving experience is amazing. I don't want to just beat a dead horse with that, but this type of engineering back in the day, back in those kind of early 90s, the BMW really did make a solid vehicle. And the engine in this car is funny. When I got to the mechanics earlier, they opened the hood and they go, oh, they actually put a decent engine in here. Back when the 7 Series was released in the United States, it only came with a V8. There were a lot of problems with it. Some of them leaked, had gasket problems. But this one was a straight 6. This one was in the 525s and the 528s of that era, and it's a really reliable, dry, clean engine. And, you know, I don't really need the extra power. Plus, I don't need the extra headache, especially not with the car I'm going to use on the weekends. You know, so yeah, this is a cool experience. Definitely one I definitely needed for sure. Let's go. Oh man. You just can't get that with a stupid Suburban. I'm not saying that. I like my Suburban, but this is cool. So cool. Honestly, for the driving experience in this car, I don't think you can get this for the money. Actually, in today's world, you can get some pretty inexpensive, smaller BMWs that are on live auctions and whatnot, and they're, you know, anywhere between the $8,000 to $16,000 range. And those are fun cars to drive. BMW does make some really great, fun, kind of, you know, move them around quick kind of cars. And as a lot of the European automakers do as well. And this car, I mean, I'm telling you, there's something about actually using all of your appendages to drive a vehicle. If you know, you know. If you have experience with a manual transmission, which I'm sure a lot of my audience does, it's mostly older guys my age or older, so I'm sure the majority of my audience knows exactly this feeling. But it is absolutely incredible, and yeah, I just want to share it with you. And tell me your stories below. If you are like kind of trying to become a car enthusiast, or you are one, I would love to eventually get into where I have a couple of fun cars here or there, if you know, if life would let me, of course. And yeah, this has been an absolute blast, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future, at least for the next year or so, until I move on to something else. I hit the phone. All right, so this is gonna be hard to film. You see I'm going around 60 kilometers an hour there. Here's the app on the phone. There I am, going 48, 49. Pretty awesome. All right, back from the mechanics, but let's show you around the car first, and then I'll dive into what he said. So one of the aspects to put this shade sail up was to actually be able to wash it and wax it and kind of keep up with its appearance, not in direct sunlight. And this definitely helped me out here. I even harken back to my memory of putting some waterless wash and shine on it, like I did my first car back in the day when I was 16 years old. And a lot of people think that this car's lines are some of the prettiest ever made in the automotive industry. I know it's a strong statement, but the BMW 7 Series, the E38 7 Series, as it was known by enthusiasts and internally, is one of the prettier cars on the road even today. Moving on to the interior, it's a well-preserved car. Everything looks not as great as the day it once was, but for being 30 years old, this looks great. Being in kilometers and liters, a little different to get used to, but as you can see, everything looks pretty clean in this car. Now, one thing of note, I did add Bluetooth to it. I did add a few extra cup holders, and I had to fix that cigarette lighter right there, but having that manual transmission is one thing that I never thought I would experience again in these cars, but here it is. And honestly, if something of nostalgia comes up in your life where you're able to pull the trigger to do something like this, I definitely highly recommend you do so. It's hard to convey this on camera, but the door shutting is just a solid experience, just like I remember. And one little interesting thing is if you're on the passenger side in the back seat, your seat belt comes over your left shoulder and clicks to your right. Now look at this, the BMW branded car phone. You knew you were in luxury and you had made it when you were on a car phone branded by BMW in the mid-90s. How much fun is this? Okay, so I just met with Jim, and he looked it over, and honestly, he said, there's a couple little things, but bring it to me next week. I'm going to be able to get to it then. So I actually drove it back home, and we're going to take care of those few little issues next week. Shouldn't be too bad. I know the comments are going to be like, oh, buddy, you're going to pay, you know, out the nose for repairs on this thing. But I think, honestly, it's just the cost of ownership. The plan is not to drive this daily. You know, a daily driver is always going to incur more maintenance, right? Because you're driving it all the time. This is just a fun car. I'm not going to put very many miles, maybe 1,000 miles a year on this thing, maybe. But it drives well now. So I'll give you an update from time to time on this channel about it. If that's something of interest, I do want you guys to let me know in the comments, please, if this style of video is kind of even relevant to a DIY woodworking YouTuber guy who does small scale manufacturing. It really, the point of this is just to give you a closer look, a closer glimpse into what we're doing. And I just figured, you know, if you're in a stage in your life, and this is a big topic, by the way, if you're in a stage in your life where this makes sense, I only paid $10,000 for this car. And I say only because I was able to, anyway, don't worry about it. I mean, I structured some investments around that we've had over the years, and was able to float this thing no problem. But that's neither here nor there. If you're in a position, which I know I was, if you know my story, I have a wonderful life. I have a wife that's dealing with some issues with autoimmune, lupus, multiple sclerosis, that kind of stuff. I've got autistic children, and I'm not painting you a bad picture at all. I love my life, but I needed this. I needed something to have fun with, you know, and it really is kind of mentally helped me. Just kind of, I don't know, just kind of relax and take it slow. And you know, I'm not going very fast because it's not a very powerful engine. But if you're in a spot where you can do this and you feel like you need to, I recommend that you do it. It's either going to be okay or it's going to be okay. So not to get too philosophical with you here, it was the time. It's the perfect car for me at this juncture, and who knows what the future holds. And I'm looking to start conversations down below about all this kind of stuff. All right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for joining me on this one. Hope you enjoyed it. See you.